Welcome to E-commerce with Coffee, a podcast powered by Amber Engine, where we share e-com secrets for brands over your favorite brew. We start with the caffeine and then leap enthusiastically into behind-the-scenes e-com insights that led to the success of our guests. I'm Nate Svoboda, and I'm about to serve you up the best. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to an episode of E-commerce with Coffee. Today, I get to speak with Andrew Davis. He's a keynote speaker and a best-selling author who's written several books, he's worked for the Muppets, and he speaks at over 50 events every year to audiences of all shapes and sizes. Now today, we're really going to be focusing on how we can all think big about brand and what kind of legacy you should want to leave. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nate. I got my coffee. I'm all ready to go. Let's do this.
No, I love that, right? You're known for your enthusiasm. I imagine caffeine plays a role in your life. What's your poison to pick?
Caffeine plays a huge role in my life. I usually get up really early in the morning. I brew a huge pot of 10 cups of coffee. My poison is just Starbucks dark roast Verona. Like I put extra scoops in there so it's really dark. And then I sit down and get to work. So it's not, I'm not a coffee connoisseur by any means, but I definitely consume my fair share of just drip coffee.
Sounds like you like strong coffee then.
A really strong coffee. Yeah. The stronger it is, the better.
I love that. I usually am I'm more of the medium roast guy, so I'm just kind of a latte, whatever. I'm trying out tea today though. I'm starting to have a little bit of stomach stuff. So I figured, so a little bit of oolong tea, it's pretty nice. Definitely not the same, but it gives you that little bit of kick, the little kickstart that you need in the morning, so whatever you got to do.
It's very true. I'm one of those that does some herbal tea at night. So I do some chamomile to get me into bed.
Yeah. No, I've done that before too. And honestly, I've found that it works. I just need to be better about it. Got to make myself do it every night.
You got to make it
probably
a routine.
Better. Yeah, right. Exactly. It's better than some of the other things you can be drinking at night.
Very true.
Well, so, Andrew, diving right into it, right? You speak at a lot of events every year. You've written a number of books, including, the bestseller Brandscaping, which I'm going to ask you to talk about in a minute. And you're known for your enthusiasm. Talk to us about what got you started down this path and made you so passionate about digital marketing, customer experience, the whole gamut.
Well, I started my career in the television world. And you mentioned I worked at the Muppets. I worked for the Jim Henson Company, and that's actually where I learned the power of building great marketing. Because the truth is, the Jim Henson Company doesn't make a lot of money on the movies or the television shows or Sesame Street or any of that stuff. Where they really make their money is selling licensed material, right? So if you like Big Bird, you buy yourself a Big Bird pillowcase and you buy a Big Bird sleeping bag. And next thing you know, you've got a bunch of Sesame Street stuff for your kids all around the house. Well, that's essentially what I realized working there, that, if you create great content and a great brand experience, people will buy anything from you. And in fact, they'll buy stuff they didn't know they needed. And so when I left the Jim Henson Company, I started a marketing agency with a friend of mine, and I very quickly realized that it's actually really hard to create a great experience if you're just focused on acquiring new customers and delivering new products out the door. What you've really got to do is actually build a great experience for the consumers you have. Even if you only have 10 initial customers, that experience has to be so good that they feel something. And that's when I really, started to see that there was an opportunity to help people leverage a better experience for the products and services they were selling, and find a better way to market their products and services, just using essentially referrals as one of the giant engines to make it work. And that passion spilled over into writing books and sharing with people what I'd learned from building other brands and working with lots of, companies and founders and, e-commerce providers, that it was really all about building a great experience.
Well, I love a lot of I love everything you just said, but what really stands out to me, a lot of times when I'll speak to people, they talk about the importance of exposing yourself to content outside of your normal industry,
Mm.
right? So, it sounds like you made a little bit of a shift in what you were doing, but you took a lot of those learnings with you. Can you talk about your feelings on, how important is it for a content creator to have that exposure to new areas, new groups outside of
Oh,
specifically who they're trying to target and sell to?
it's crucial. I mean, look, like I think true innovation and creativity comes from being uncomfortable. And it comes from you forcing yourself to make connections between things you didn't think were relevant and what you do. And I'll give you a quick example. I don't know if you've ever heard of roto eye drops. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so roto eye drops, is eye drops like Visine for for your eyes if you're not familiar with the brand. But if you go and you look at every one of the other manufacturers of eye drops, they all have like a beautiful woman with gorgeous eyes on their homepage, and then they tell you how like their solution will make your eyes feel better and less drowsy and more watery when they're supposed to be watery. Well, roto eye drops, when they were really trying to penetrate the US market, they're a Japanese company. They were having trouble. They were going all to the pharmaceutical, conventions. They were going to CVS and Walgreens and all the retailers trying to get their product carried in stores, and it was not working. No one wanted their product because it looked like and felt like every other product on the marketplace. That's when Roto Eye Drops did exactly what we're talking about. They decided to get uncomfortable, and instead of going to spending their time and energy at pharmaceutical conferences and trying to get optometrists to tell people to buy Roto Eye Drops, they went to a gaming convention. And they first went and observed, right? They realized, oh my gosh, all these people are staring at screens all day long. They're not blinking, and as a result, their eyes are drying out, and then they're having eye pain. So the next, within months, they decided, you know what, this is our target market. It's gamers, and they bought a little booth at the PAX convention, which is it's called the Penny Arcade convention, and they went and put up their booth. Now their booth wasn't just like, hey, eye drops, and it didn't have a picture of a pretty girl with gorgeous eyes. They actually set up a booth called Stare Wars, like STARE Wars, okay? And they were going to give $10,000 to the person who stared the longest without blinking, and then they made it like a double elimination thing, right? And they took off. Like their product just exploded as a result in this one little niche community. And they never would have come up with this if they weren't thinking about getting uncomfortable, if they weren't aware that a new experience might help them connect the dots between a new opportunity. And today, their product is so successful. You can go to CVS, you can go to Walgreens, you can go to Publix or your local grocery store, and you can pick up Roto eye drops. So look, not just for content creators, for marketers and business owners specifically, you need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And the farther outside of your sphere of knowledge you go, the better the connections will be and the easier the opportunities will be to see. So, if you sell coffee and you think your audience is coffee drinkers, go to, a sleeping convention and see what you find. That's going to make you uncomfortable because it's the opposite of what you're trying to do, but you'll see opportunity everywhere.
No, I love that, and I've tried to apply that to my personal life, right? Where growth only comes from being uncomfortable, right? Or
Yeah,
I heard a quote recently, a comfort zone is a great place, but not very many things grow there, right? So it's not,
very
it
true.
totally applies.
Absolutely.
I think some of this probably, or what I'm about to say or ask, ties into what we were just discussing. But you talk to your audiences and challenge them to think big about their business and about brand. What do you mean by that? And what do you want your audience to leave your session thinking, feeling, believing?
Well, I guess, okay, so the think big idea is, it's really easy to get caught up in the mundane and the day to day and the next thing you want to develop or the next product you want to release or the next audience you want to target or the next campaign you need to execute. That can very quickly overwhelm the original idea and reason you got started. And I think the bigger you think, the more ambitious your goals are, the more motivated and inspired your audience is. I know you had Kat on, recently, and she talked a lot about mission driven, e-commerce and mission driven product and mission driven companies. And I think that's thinking big, right? Like I want to change the world with the product or service I'm delivering. I don't want to just sell more of the stuff, right? And the bigger you think, the more ambitious you are. I think the more people you inspire to go on the journey with you. And those are the people that leave a legacy, right? Just kind of thinking about the next thing you need to accomplish or the next small goal you have isn't really leaving a legacy. It's just a milestone on a short journey that we're on. And when it comes to the speeches, for me, it depends on the speech. Like, I have a speech called Loyalty Loop, which is all about inspiring people to think about building a better experience for the customers they have. And at the end of the day, all I want people to be inspired to think big about is attaching an emoji to the entire experience they deliver for the clients and customers they already have. So when they get that box, what are they feeling the instant they open it? Not what do they see, not what do they get, not are they happy with the product, what is the overall experience up until that point feeling like, and attach an emoji to that, because that kind of big thinking will start to change the way you treat the little things. Or when I'm talking about the cube of creativity, which is just 4 constraints that you can add to any creative or product or initiative that help you actually come up with better solutions faster. The goal is to just get people to embrace constraints. A lot of new companies or smaller companies complain about the resources they don't have, but true innovation and true opportunity comes out of actually seeing all those constraints as an opportunity to create something only the way you can. And if the pandemic taught us anything, it's actually that. It's that if you embrace the constraints, you'll find creative solutions to your business challenges, your product challenges, your market fit, your customer challenges, and you'll be able to come through them in a way only you can. And it helps you ignore all the advice and insight you're getting from other people who aren't in the situation you are in. So that, I don't know if that helped, Nate, but I want people to think big always.
No,
It
yeah.
will change your perspective.
No, it absolutely did make sense. And, I know you have all of these different topics you speak on. You have a number of different strategies. I wish we could dive into every single one, right? I feel like it's immensely valuable, each individual one. But so, one thing I want to latch on from what you said, you talked about legacy, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the show. What would you say, and you did just explain this a little bit, but just to really pin the nail on it, what would you say is the difference between growing a business and leaving a legacy? And maybe what's an example of a business that you think has done a good job of this?
Sure. The key difference between growing a business and leaving a legacy is someone who leaves a legacy, or a company that leaves a legacy, is one that leaves something there long after they're gone, the person or the business, that they've made such a big impact on the people they served, that the impact is longer lasting than the last product they delivered. And for me, a great example of this is a woman named Jenny Doan, who I met a few years ago. It's like 7 or 8 years ago now. And she runs a business in a little town called Hamilton, Missouri. And when I first met her, I went into this little town. Hamilton, Missouri is only 200 people, by the way. And so, sorry, it's 1,200 people. I walked into town and I was like looking for, what made this town unique. And I walked into her store, and she sells quilts. Okay, so her product is quilts. And I'm thinking, how does this woman in a town of 1,200 make any money? Because if you know anything about the quilt business, it's pretty simple. You make a quilt, it takes you 9 months to make a quilt. And if you can only make 1.3 quilts a year, to make a living wage, you've got to sell, your quilts at like 30 grand a pop, like just to make a living wage. And I'm thinking, how does she make this work here? And I asked her, what's her vision? What's her big idea? What's her dream for her little company? And she says, I want to turn Hamilton, Missouri into the Disneyland of quilting. That's what she told me. And I was like, this woman is crazy, right? Like that. I thought, this is never going to happen. This little town is nothing. And I told her, I gave her a business card. I said, stay in touch. I want to see how it goes. And a few months later, they started sending me YouTube videos she was uploading. And she had this idea where she was teaching people how to quick quilt. And the idea is, instead of taking 9 months, you could make a quilt in as little as 30 days. I thought, this is great. Like, this is genius. Some of her quilts you could make in as little as a day. And so all of a sudden she had a whole audience of people all over the world, 250,000 subscribers within 6 months, watching these videos on how to quick quilt. And she turned the Missouri Star Quilt Company into a company that sells the pre-cut fabrics to make quick quilts. So you don't have to do the cutting. One of the steps you can, eliminate and make more efficient is actually this, right? And all of a sudden, she says, "You know what? This isn't my dream. My dream is to leave a legacy to transform Hamilton, Missouri, and turn it into the Disneyland of quilting." So she started an ad on YouTube for $50 a week, inviting her subscribers to come visit the Missouri Star Quilt Company in Hamilton, Missouri. Now, there's no international airport there. It's an hour and a half from any like major airport. It's literally the middle of nowhere, and people started showing up. And today, she has turned the Missouri Star Quilt Company into a $150 million a year business. And they have thousands of people visiting every single week. They do 5,000 orders every single day online. People come from as far away as the Middle East to the middle of nowhere in Missouri to visit the Missouri Star Quilt Company. And that is leaving a legacy. She has transformed that town. She employs 200 people from their county. She's the largest employer in the county. And all of a sudden, that legacy is going to outlive the Missouri Star Quilt Company. That town will be forever changed, and every person in it and all the people who visit will be forever changed. That is a real legacy.
And, I love that because it sounds, from what I know about brandscaping, right, and I'm maybe stealing your thunder a little bit here, part of the context of that book is, you put your consumer first and you identify, what are other brands in my network or in my ecosystem that are complementary so we can amplify our message. And so it sounds, and, in addition to like content generation and all that, building your brand should be at the foundation of what can I provide someone else, right? And so it sounds like
Absolutely.
That's exactly what she was doing. And I mean,
That's exactly
obviously, I'm sure there were a lot of naysayers that probably would have, made her feel a little bit down. But she obviously saw something other people didn't, and she strove towards it.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, there's another town in America that's known as the quilting capital of the world, and they are very traditional quilters, meaning they kind of believe that quick quilting is a hack, it's a shortcut, and it's illegitimate. And if you do that, you're not a real quilter. She has a whole community of people who don't believe this is how you really quilt. But for Jenny Doan, her mission was to, help people embrace quilting. And one of the biggest hurdles is how long it takes. So
Yeah.
she listened to their concerns. She found a way around it, and she delivered on the promise to teach you how to make a quilt in as little as a day. And she's delivered on that constantly. She's focused squarely on what exactly can I do to help my audience be better. By the way, she has a print magazine. Like this is an age where, no one uses print, but she has a print magazine that makes $2 million a year in revenue. They send out a print magazine every quarter. It's $7 a quarter to buy the magazine, and people collect it. It's like a collectible. People have shelves where they showcase their quick quilting magazine. I think it's called The Patch. But again, it's because she listened to her audience. They said they wish they had the best tutorials that were YouTube videos, by the way, in a book, and that they could put on their shelf. And she said, "Sure, let's do it. Like, here's, buy them now." And just clearly understanding that your audience comes first always will make a huge impact in the way you build your business.
So, I know this is just one example of, someone who had a great idea and they created content that spoke to their specific consumer, right? Consumer preferences and expectations change constantly and, arguably even more so now than ever before. Can you talk to us a little bit about, or break down for us, the history of video content for brands, right? How it has been used in the past and really how we're seeing it be used successfully today?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you just even if you the agency I started in 2000 was focused squarely on video because Jim Costco, my business partner, and I both came out of television. He was a journalist, and I was working at the Jim Henson Company and the Today Show, and producing stuff for all sorts of news programming. And so that was in the days where if you wanted to distribute a video, it had to be on DVD or CD-ROM. For you youngsters listening, that's like a disc you put into your computer and it spins around. Anyway, that's how we got our video distributed. And, if you think about the transformation in just the last 22 years from being, a very heavy lift to distribute some video that was high quality to now being able to pick up your phone and shoot an unbelievably high quality video that you can edit on your phone and upload in an instant. The transformation on the technical side is revolutionary. And I think it's opened up the potential for other people to tell better stories that inspire people to buy stuff they didn't know they need. It goes back to what I learned at the Jim Henson Company. If you put your audience first and create content that it inspires them to go on a journey they never expected, that's the kind of content that's going to make an impact in your business. Sure, you can create how-to videos and tutorial videos. You can kind of take the Jenny Doan approach, and that's a fine approach. But I think we're moving into maybe the third era, I think, of online video. The first being, hey, I can do product demos online and I can show you what you're buying instead of just tell you what you're buying. The second era was kind of the how-to and demand gen era, where you could introduce your product using a variety of video types to introduce your audience to a product they'd never seen before. And I think today we're in an age where you can create and build an audience that's there for the video primarily and never expected to buy a product, but will, and they'll buy anything. Like, doesn't matter if you sell quilts, you can sell socks too, because they've fallen in love with the format of the content, they've fallen in love with the talent behind the content, and they've fallen in love with the brand you've built instead of just the product you're selling. And so, I'm excited to see much more story-driven content that's higher quality, because not that I don't mean in production value, because the production value, I think, is so high quality these days with just the basic stuff. I mean high quality in the story you're telling, and the audience you're building. I think we'll see a bigger shift over the next 5 years to brands that are building content that people want, before they even want the product the company sells.
Yeah, and it's interesting, with like Instagram and TikTok and those getting used so much more. Some of the fastest impulse purchases that I've ever made were just from scrolling and seeing a video, and it's, not a how-to, it's like a very artistically created, like, here, let me show you the cool thing about this product, and then, oh my God, I gotta click buy now, and I can nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely, you can. It's pretty amazing.
And I'm curious, I appreciate how you just broke that down into those three phases. But so, especially in light of the past couple of years and, COVID, especially when it was really initially starting, how much of these trends in phase three would you say happened because of COVID versus, they were already kind of happening and maybe they were propelled because of COVID? But I guess what I'm asking, what came out of COVID that maybe wouldn't have if it, the pandemic hadn't taken place?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest shift was a shift to more live video during COVID. If COVID actually, sure, I think COVID accelerated the desire and need to create video on the product or brand side, but I think that was just an acceleration, and it was a trend that was already there. I think the one thing that I had not seen being utilized very often, but all of a sudden saw explode during COVID, was the use of live video. And I saw some really innovative uses. People had been doing things like, Facebook Live broadcasts that felt more like home shopping network, like kind of pitch shows. And they were unbelievably effective during COVID because people were stuck, sitting around wondering what to do next, and all of a sudden found themselves tuning into an hour and a half live long show about like fashion trends from someone who sells a bunch of fashion items, right? Like, that is just genius. And that, I do not believe, existed in the volume or the quantity or the quality before COVID, and is a direct result of COVID. And I think it's one that's not going away. And I think it's one underutilized by most brands. Like, if you think like home shopping network on the audience side, like you can't just sell a product. You've got to be able to think about what does the audience really desire, and how can you build an hour-long live program around selling them a bunch of stuff that they didn't realize they needed, because you truly understand the audience.
Yep. And people, they crave that interaction, right? They want to feel like somebody's talking to them and having that personal experience like you get in the store. And Amazon's doing it now, and they've been doing it for a while too.
It's like a watch party, and I think that's what COVID helped us with. It helped us feel like we can actually consume content together without being together. And I think for a whole generation, that was a new idea. For one whole generation, it's something that had been happening, but not happening in an organized way. And there are whole communities that have sprouted up, to get back to brandscaping. Brandscaping is all about kind of partnering with other brands to get access to your audience in a new way. I saw people doing live video kind of collabs, with brands that I don't think they would have partnered with before COVID, but they realized, I only have two products, you have four products. It'd be great if we got together and helped our audience understand how all of these products can work together to create a better you, right? And that was phenomenal to see.
And I'm glad you just touched on it, and you just gave it at a high level. Can you talk to us about, Brandscaping and Town Inc? Like, give us, the basic premise and why you
Sure.
felt like you needed to write them.
Well, brandscaping is something I'm really passionate about. The book came out in 2012, but I honestly believe it's more relevant today than it was then. And maybe some of the examples are old, but the concept is great. The idea is that you don't necessarily need to pay for access to audience anymore. And your ability to find and connect and collaborate with brands and especially influencers in new and inventive ways has never been possible in the history of commerce until now. And so the book is kind of a recipe for truly understanding what makes a great, content partnership and brand partnership. And I think the biggest mistake that people are making today is looking at influencers and brand partnerships as just one-offs. Like, we just need a mention and we'll pay for a mention and a post and a thing, right? The best and most profitable and successful partnerships are coming out of longer term, product and innovation concepts that are true partnerships between an influencer or two brands. And so I think so that's brandscaping. And Town Inc. Town Inc. actually came out of my desire to see small and medium-sized cities and towns kind of rebuild their success in a new world. And so the whole idea is, how do you actually market the place you're doing business just as much, if not more, than the business you do? And if you sell a product right now that anywhere in the world, you can buy it anywhere in the world, and it seems counterintuitive that where your product is made could be relevant, but it turned out in all the research I did and the kind of case studies in the book that when you actually market the place you do business along with the business you do, you make a huge impact in the community, just like Jenny Doan did, but you also actually attach a meaning to the place. A good example, a quick one, by the way, is Shinola. I don't know if you're familiar with Shinola from Detroit.
Oh yeah.
Um, Shinola was an old brand that was resurrected by a venture capitalist who wanted to localize the brand. And he basically went all over the country. This is the most amazing case study I've ever seen. He went all over the country asking people how much they'd pay for a pen, and he'd say, like, this pen was made in China, and they'd say, oh, it's $5, I'll pay for that. And then he'd pull out a very similar pen and say, how much would you pay for this pen? It was made in America, and they'd say $10. Excuse me. And then he'd do all different cities all over the United States, like Austin, or it was made in Chicago. And the highest grossing pen, the one that would go for $15 every time on average, was if it was made in Detroit. So that's when he decided to move his business from Dallas and brand it Shinola Detroit. And he took over a six-floor building in an old GM building and started churning out really high-end watches. And today, Shinola is a $200 million business that's built around localizing a brand that you can buy anywhere. And it capitalizes on the connotations of Detroit as a manufacturing hub. And by the way, they had one of the best About Us pages I've ever read. So that's what Town Inc. is about, like actually leveraging the place you do business to help market your product as unique and different.
I love that. And Amber Engine's actually based in Detroit, so that very much so hit home. Very familiar with that brand.
So there you go.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we're coming up to time. A couple of the last things that I wanted to ask you about, though. So, in the context of brandscaping, you just gave us the overview, and we talked about the awesome story with Jenny and the quilting business in that small town. And it seems like it makes sense. Companies should be putting their consumer first when they're developing the brand, because that's ultimately how you're going to convey the message that they want to hear. But how do you recommend brands and businesses force themselves to do this consistently, right? Obviously, if you have an entrepreneur who's leading from the top, that's awesome. But, how much of it comes down to values and mission, or, I guess, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't, I'm not a big believer in like printed values and mission statements as much as I am a believer in constant communication with an existing customer, and from the top down. I think the bigger the business gets, the more complicated the org chart gets, the farther and farther the customer gets away from most of the people in the organization. You're left with like your customer service team and maybe a salesperson or two that's maybe doing, distribution deals, that has any semblance or understanding of what the customer is facing and what they really believe or think. And you have tiers and tiers above that, all the way up to a C-level executive who hasn't talked to a customer in 3, 6, 9 months, sometimes years, to be totally frank. They haven't had a true conversation with a customer. They haven't gone to visit a customer. And if you want to stay customer focused, you want to interact with your customers on a daily basis, literally daily. So, I know and I believe that some of the most successful CEOs in the world take time out of every single day to communicate with a customer. Sometimes it's just an email note or a question or a support concern that they want to get involved in. Sometimes it's a full-on half-hour, 45-minute phone call with a customer, not because they were upset or angry, because they're one of the best customers in the book, and they want to thank them for their business and talk about what they want next, what they need, what their life is like. That's how you keep yourself grounded and customer focused. There's no substitution for asking a customer what they read instead of sending out a survey hoping they'll check some boxes and tell you what they read. So if you want to know what they're consuming, you have to listen for it just as much as you have to ask for it. So my best advice is to spend some time with the customer.
Yeah, spend some time with the customer and make sure you have those feedback loops internally, right? It sounds like what you're saying is make sure that gets put up to the C-level or up to the highest levels in the 100%. Company and, dispersed across.
I think what I'm saying, Nate, is it actually has to start at the top instead of dispersed up. I'm saying the CEO, if the CEO makes it a priority to communicate and interact with customers every day, the same will happen the rest of the way down. It's only when it's supposed to be driven from the bottom up that I think it does fall apart.
No, and I'm glad that you made that distinction. That's a very fair point. Because a lot of times, even in the software world, right, you have people that are out talking to the companies, and they're bringing that back up to marketing, and then it just gets lost, right? So you absolutely need visibility from the top. I love that. Well, we've talked about a lot of things, and given that you are so much of a forward thinker, what I'd love to leave our audience with, what is a trend that you're excited about and watching, right? That can be a technology trend, it can be marketing more so related. I guess what's exciting to you right now? A lot of things, I guess, but
what is it? Well, I'll say the one thing that is excited me and maybe blew my mind more than anything else was I had a conversation with a gentleman who sells salsa, like, chips and salsa out of
as opposed to all the other kinds of salsa.
Well, I wasn't sure if the listener might hear me say seltzer or something. So I was like, I wanted to be really clear that it's salsa. So he makes his own salsa. It's a small business. He's based in Southern California. And he's been looking for like the marketing silver bullet to make his salsa go crazy, but he's doing pretty decent sales. And when I was talking to him, I said, how are you generating sales? And he said, most of it's peer to peer, and I sell through WhatsApp. Now, I'm not a WhatsApp user, and if you're in America and you're probably not that familiar with WhatsApp, maybe you've used it a couple times. Nate, do you use it a lot?
No, I know what it is, but I agree with you. I think it's probably not as common.
Yeah, but it's one of the most used apps in the rest of the world, right? So He sells to a lot of Latin Americans and specifically Mexicans who are transplants into Southern California. And they love WhatsApp. They use it to communicate with their family members at home and even within the family in California. And so what he's done, and I've never seen this before, I actually went through the process. He has a little shop on WhatsApp. So if you can communicate with him on WhatsApp and you say, hey, what salsas do you have in stock? It sends you like an inventory, a little shopping cart you can add to in WhatsApp. So I'm having a conversation. I'm trying to make this really clear because it blew my mind. I'm having a conversation with him and I can add stuff to my cart and then I can say, yeah, please send me these 3 salsas. And then he says, no problem. Here's my Venmo account. I send him the money. He sends me a shipping confirmation all on WhatsApp. I never went to his e-commerce store. I don't know if he has a web address. I don't know anything except for his WhatsApp phone number. So for me, what the revelation was, like everybody's talked about conversational commerce. I had never seen it actually happen until an experience with one man who sells salsa like door to door basically in California. And that for me was mind blowing. So what trend am I following and what do I think every product or consumer brand should be looking at? I think they should be looking at what Cesar is doing with his salsa on WhatsApp, because I think it's a transformation in the way we purchase.
I love that. I think, there's an interview that I just did recently that I think will pique your interest, and it's all about that, right? In the United States, we don't, we had the desktop revolution. The mobile phone came after that, whereas
That's
in a
right.
lot of other parts of the world, desktops didn't proliferate nearly as much. So to your point, it's fascinating, and I agree. I am looking forward to the day where I can make my purchases through text. If that's
It's
there's a
amazing.
safe way to do that, I am totally on board with it.
And that's what WhatsApp and the salsa is really good, by the way. So, yeah, I've never transacted like that, and I can't wait to do it again.
Awesome. I love that. That's a great trend, and I appreciate you sharing it. Well, Andrew, this has been a fantastic conversation. Where can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to, if anything we talked about resonated, they want to bring you on for a speaking
Sure.
engagement?
Well, you can find me at akadrewdavis.com, like aka also known as drewdavis.com. The best way to find me actually is on LinkedIn. So just search for Andrew Davis, look for the guy with the bow tie and the orange glasses, and connect with me there. I can't wait to chat.
Awesome. That sounds good. Well, thank you very much for sharing your time with us, and we look forward to having you on again in the future.
This was awesome, Nate. Thanks for the coffee.
That's it for this episode of E-commerce with Coffee, powered by Amber Engine. If you haven't gotten your fix yet, be sure to get more e-commerce brand secrets on our website at amberengine.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.